second episode of Sondervous. I'm Michelle Doggett Clark,
I'm Victoria Clark Jones.
and thanks so much, guys, for joining us. And yeah, we're just happy to be back here. It's been a while to get the second episode recorded because we've had to deal with sickness and just a lot of the things that go on at the beginning of a new year. But we're here today, and yeah, super happy to be here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So today we wanted to basically cover, I think we've got about three topics that we're looking at talking about today. So the first one will be, as last time during our first episode during Christmas, I brought a story of childhood and Victoria helped me to engage it and explore it. But we didn't have time to talk about her story. So this time we'll be talking about Victoria's story. And that's the first thing we'll cover. And then the other two things we'd like to discuss this time is you may have heard us talking about a mysterious they. And the reason why we use this word a couple times in the first episode was because Victoria and I had a bit of a different upbringing. And we'd like to lean into that a bit more and explain how our childhoods were, how it was growing up, and just give a bit more context around that.
Yeah.
And then also, just I guess at the end of this episode, we'd like to talk about a little bit more what we're doing right now, kind of our story as it's been in the past few years for us, from where we've come to where we are now, and just some of the things that are important to us, close to our hearts, just to help you, have a bit more of an understanding of who we are and get to know us better. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Anything do you want to
Excited for
add
this one
to that,
today.
Vic?
Yeah, I think I said I'm excited to kind of get into explaining a little bit more about us because I know our first episode we were talking, and of course, people who are close to us or our families know that we've had this upbringing. But for the average person, they're like, why were you guys doing all this stuff? Where were your parents? Like, what was going on? So without a lot of context and background, it could just seem like, what are they talking about? So it is good. I always feel like as a part of getting to know us and who we are is a part of our, our story as well. And we talk about how telling our story and sharing our own stories, we as a collective, it's really an important part of finding out who we are, where we're going, what's, kind of stopping us or what hinders us from growth and moving forward because our story impacts so much of who we are.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, so I guess we could start then. So Vix, I wanted to ask you, um, during Christmas, you were going to bring a story from your
Mhm.
childhood, and I just wanted to open the floor to you, hold space, and ask you about this story. And yeah,
Mhm.
just thanks for sharing it with us.
So I have this memory, and when I talk about it with my kids, we were talking about like pets one time. We talked about different pets growing up, and so I have this like traumatic story about a pet that I had and how it really impacted me in many different ways, not just as far as a pet goes, even though, I was like, I never want to own another rabbit, which was my pet at the time. So I think I was about nine or 10. I can't remember what, but we were, we go more into this later, how we were homeschooled. And I bought, we all went to a pet store, all of our classmates, and we all bought like different pets. And they were like small, so rabbits or hamsters or guinea pigs. And I chose this rabbit. Now, we never really been able to have an opportunity like that to have something of our own before. So for me, it was like a big deal getting to choose my own rabbit, and it was my rabbit. So as a 9-year-old, the first time, doing something like that was a really big deal. And, I would take it out every day. We had like recess. We had a funny name for it, which was called Get Out. We'll explain why later.
Yeah.
Um, but I used to take my rabbit out all the time. It was this baby white rabbit with, red eyes, albino rabbit. And I remember carrying it one day out to go play with my, recess. and one of the other kids ran into me and bumped me, and the rabbit fell out of my arms onto the floor on its side. And I was like, oh my God, as a 9-year-old, I didn't really understand that that's probably pretty dangerous. But I picked it back up and was like comforting it and then put it back in its cage. And then we went back to class afterwards. And about halfway through the class, an older boy, he was probably like 15 or 16, he was from the older classes, he came in and like asked me to come out. And he said, I have something to tell you. And I came out and he was holding my rabbit. And he said, I think your rabbit's dying. And he was, again, we had a funny idea of what was the right thing to do. So I think he was trying to pump its heart. I remember he had it on its back and he was trying to pump its heart. He's like, I'm trying to keep it alive for you. I don't know where I got that idea. And I just remember the rabbit's face. It obviously was in a lot of pain. It was kind of like, dying, and I could tell. So I just started crying, felt so guilty. And I remember standing there with this older boy and kind of watching my rabbit die. And that in itself, of course, anybody who has a pet who has died can relate, and a pet who's died as a child as well, you know. And that was already traumatic enough for me. And then my teacher came out, because I was probably gone for 15, 20 minutes. And my teacher came out and started yelling at me and like, why aren't you in class? What are you doing? And I told her, like, my rabbits just died. And I remember her saying, you know why? This is a punishment. You must have made God angry. This is a punishment on you. This is your fault. And I remember just standing there. I said I have very, very vivid memories of, these very traumatic experiences that have happened. I remember just standing there holding my dead rabbit, crying, and her shaming me basically in front of these older boys. And some of the other students had come out from the class as well and were standing there watching me. And I don't know if it was the stress of the situation, but all of a sudden I really needed to pee. And so I was standing there holding my dead rabbit, having her basically berate me and tell her that was my fault my rabbit died and God was punishing me. And I asked her, I said, can I go pee? I really need to go pee. And she said, no, you're going to stand there and you're going to listen. And so I'm there crying with all the other kids watching me. And I think the intensity of the situation and just feeling so helpless. And on top of that, then I peed my pants. And so I just remember completely breaking down and running to the bathroom and just staying in there. It was like such a traumatic situation for me. And that to me has always stayed with me. And even though, I've told myself as an adult different things that have happened, try to explain it to myself and rationalize it, it's always stayed with me. So, and one of the things that you probably should know about me is I'm a highly sensitive person. So when I talk about these things, I relive all these emotions again. I'm a very easy crier. And that's kind of one of the things that I was embarrassed about in the past, especially growing up, because I was shamed for crying a lot or being too sensitive. And as an adult, I've kind of owned that about myself. So, yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much, Victoria, for sharing that story with me and with everyone. Where's your heart right now as you tell this story?
While I was talking, I could feel like so much activation here. I could feel it coming up into my throat, and I know that that's grief for me. And yeah, just a lot of activation in my chest. And I have done a lot of these kind of processes, so I know how to kind of calm myself down. But I know if I let myself really go into the story and probably relive all those emotions, and I usually do that by closing my eyes and like blocking out everything, I can really feel the emotions super big coming up in my body.
Yeah, I can see that as you're like moving and there's a lot going on. What emotions, if you put a name to that, the core emotion that you're feeling at that, what would it be?
Just a lot of sadness. A lot of sadness about the whole situation, and how it was so unfair. That's always what I felt. It was so unfair and so wrong. I was a child, and that, you know, any adult with any kind of empathy would know that a child is going to be in so much pain after just losing a pet. And, I think in my head, I'm like a normal adult would go in and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, it's time to go back to class, though." You'd empathize a little bit, even though you maybe wouldn't make a big deal of it. But the fact that you would go to the opposite and actually tell the child that it was their fault and berate them, that for me was just like, and I know how it felt as a child. I believed it. I was like, that's why I always told the kids, I may have other pets, but I'm never having another rabbit again, because I still carry this trauma with me. And it's even when I see other kids, I see rabbits in the store, I'm like, oh, no, I don't want it. I don't want it. Right. There's so much pain surrounding that.
Mhm.
And so there is sadness. And I think that's the core emotion, but there's also a lot of anger towards
Yeah.
that teacher for being so uncaring and so just having no empathy or um, no awareness of all the different components of your rabbit died, you're really sad, you need to go to the bathroom. Okay, I'm going to let you go. This is probably a big experience for you. And also the fact that all your other peers are standing there, and some older children as well, like older boys. And I think that was it for me. The fact that it already was embarrassing and traumatic that I peed my pants, but the fact that all my classmates witnessed it, and I was being bullied at the time as well. So, yeah,
Mm. There
just
in that
it really
moment,
built
sadness.
onto each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at the core of all of that is a little girl who's brokenhearted because her gorgeous little bunny just died, just passed away. I noticed
Yeah.
when you, first of all, when you started to tell the story, your eyes lit up and you said, "This was my bunny. This was
Yeah.
my own bunny." And I wanted to ask you about that. What did having this bunny as your own little pet, what did that mean to you?
It was the first time, I think, growing up the way we did. We didn't have a lot of personal belongings. Everything was shared, everything was communal. Um, we also, we didn't have a lot of money. So to have something that was considered a luxury was something that was really special. And it was finally, you see this kind of pattern coming up a lot in my childhood, where I was like, this was mine. Anything that was mine that didn't belong to anybody else and didn't, um, I think we had a lot of our belongings like almost used as they could be taken away from us at any time. And this was my rabbit, so it was my responsibility, and I think I was really proud of that, as a 9-year-old, having this responsibility, and it's my rabbit, and I get to feed it, and I get to change the cage and everything. And so there was a lot of pride in there that this was mine, and maybe feeling like deserving as well, like, wow,
Mm.
I deserve having a rabbit and all the responsibility that comes with it, but this is mine, and I don't have to share it with anybody else. No one can take it away from me, right? Because if they took it away, then it would be their responsibility. So for me, it was like the fact that it was a living thing was meant that it was mine to take care of and be responsible for, but also that no one could take it away from me.
Hmm. Hmm. So it was yours, it was something that was special. No one could take it away from you.
Yeah.
It meant something. It really meant something to you that maybe you had never experienced or had up until that point. And so that marked something for you. So in your rabbit dying and passing away, it wasn't only that you were losing a pet, you were.
Yeah.
What other significance was attached to your rabbit dying?
I always felt this sense of guilt, like, because other kids had pets as well, and their pets didn't die.
Hmm.
So maybe it meant, and then I think the teacher coming in and reinforcing that belief of God was punishing me in some way.
You were less worthy, less
Yeah,
valuable,
yeah, for sure.
because it was your rabbit that died and not theirs.
Yes.
Hmm. What other things led you to believe that it must be something wrong, essentially, with who you were, something about you, something that she was enforcing this belief, this
Yeah.
something about yourself that was really painful and shameful. What other
Yeah.
things led into or fed into that belief?
It was around that time I said I started to get really badly bullied in
Mm,
that same class, actually.
mm,
Um, and before that, I was always, funnily from a young age, I was always a teacher's pet. I was always like the teacher's favorite. Um, always helped the teacher. I was always called upon. I was always told I was very smart. And that age, now I understand this from kids as well. That's the age they start to kind of be more aware of peers and peer pressure and things like that. So the fact that I was now in this new group of kids and I was the youngest, I joined the class later than everybody else, and I was being bullied at the time. And I was being told by the teacher that, I wasn't smart. And she gave me this teacher. I think, there were other dynamics going on outside the classroom as well. We talk about, in the commune setup that we lived in.
mm,
But this was the first time I can really remember feeling there was something wrong with me. Like I
mm,
wasn't smart. Um, there was something wrong with me because the other kids decided to pick on me, and I never had experienced that before.
mm,
So I think it was possibly just that period of time in my life where we go through these things that really impact us. And sometimes there are periods of time. And this was the time of my life that I can remember getting a lot of negative messages
mm,
from, other children, from my teacher, and now it seemed from God. So
mm.
it was really a difficult thing to accept that this was a part of my core beliefs about myself forming, kind of going into that tween teen stage when you're discovering your identity. And I was like, there's something wrong with me.
There's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
It must be. There must be something wrong with me because
Look at all
why
this
am I
evidence.
now? Yeah, look at all
Yeah.
this evidence. Why am I being bullied? Why is it my pet, my beautiful pet that I love so much? Why did my pet die? And
Yeah.
I'm wondering who was there to refute these accusations against you that there's something wrong with you. You're not that smart. You're not that special. There's actually something seriously wrong with you because look at these things that are happening. Who was there to refute that and to say, no, that's not true. You're amazing. You're beautiful. You're gorgeous. You are smart. You're enough.
I don't think at that time there were any people in my life. I know you were also in that class and a part of the older kids, and you stepped in. I can remember you stepping in and trying to stop the bullies in terms of like, leave her alone. And we spent some time with mom and dad, one evening a week, parent time. Um, but they were always so busy with our younger brothers and sisters. So I just remember kind of being this. I had to be a good child. I kind of had to be invisible because they were always busy with more important things. And so I did get, I guess, that sense of not really that I'm special as an individual, but I'm loved in this group of people, which were, my family members. Um, but that happened once a week for an hour. So
Mm.
not much.
Hmm. I'm loved in this group of people. So you're a part of a whole, you're a bigger part of a collective, but your
Yeah.
individuality, your identity, what makes you stand out or you special, um, it didn't seem like, I don't know, just from what you're saying, that it was necessarily unconditional. It's you had to be in a class, you needed to toe the line, you needed to do something and be something in order to be accepted or be loved. And I
Mhm.
guess if you're saying you weren't with your parents for, didn't see them that much, or they weren't there to really offer that validation and affirmation of who you were,
Yeah.
that's tough because you're then bombarded day in and day out with all those, like you were saying, those accusations and then the evidence that there's something seriously wrong with you. So
Yeah.
your rabbit dying and passing away and everything that happened, it was like, this is the proof that you're not
Yes.
good enough. You're not good
Hmm.
enough. And then the way that your teacher could not offer any comfort, any empathy to you, any compassion. Like this little girl's rabbit has just died and she's beside herself and just total lack of awareness and to offer you any comfort or goodness that's really tough and it's a lot to hold. And like you said, you've carried this story with you then
Yeah.
as into your adulthood. So then when you're an adult now and you're looking at pets and what's going on for you, how then do you kind of go from that story as a child to a grown up now?
I see that I definitely link the idea, like the belief forming of there's something wrong with you. You're different, you're not enough. I can still see how that belief impacts me to this day of, you know, the way I am, the way I show up in the world, the way I show up in my relationships. And obviously I have been doing like years of therapy in order to heal this, but I know it's still a default pattern in me. And it's something that comes up in my head of there's something wrong with you or like you're not enough, and I have to obviously refute it myself. So basically become that person who should have been that adult saying no, this is not your fault, right? I have to become that person now, but I know that that hurt child is still there.
Mm,
And so that's how it impacts me as a, as a person, that I know these core beliefs are still there and I'm working really hard to change them and rewrite them.
mm,
And also, it serves as a kind of a warning of this is I can remember so vividly how that experience was for me and how I felt, and obviously the impact that it led on to. So when my kids are going through something painful, and the thing is that I don't even have to, it doesn't have to be something super traumatic like the death of a pet, but it could be something like, hey, I just got picked on at school, or, this, I didn't get invited to this birthday party, or something like that. Something that for them in their world is a big deal for them. Now, as an adult, the death of a pet is, it's something that affects adults as well. Adults will cry over it. But sometimes as adults or parents, we can kind of not really understand the magnitude of a problem for a child, the way it shows up in their world, because we're like, it's such a small thing. And, we have our solutions and we have a much bigger view of the world. And so it's really helpful for me when, for example, my youngest comes to me and he's upset about something, to be like, I could be that adult who's like, come on, it's not a big deal, whatever. We'll buy you a new rabbit. Or, some parents would say that, to actually bring myself into his shoes, because I can remember how big the deal was for me as a child.
mm,
And to be like, I'm not going to be that adult who's like, it's not a big deal. Why are you making a big fuss of it? Of, I'm going to actually try to live his experience and see what he's seeing, see things through his eyes. And when I do that, I'm like, wow, I can tell it's a big deal. Right.
right.
And so it's much easier for me to empathize with other people, and especially a child,
Yeah.
and kind of remind myself that it may not make sense to me as a parent, but for this child, whoever, if it's a client, if it's my own kids, this is a big deal for them. And I'm going
Mm,
to be there for them and I'm going to empathize.
right.
And yeah, just any notion of I'm going to jump in and lecture them. And now the thing is, I used to do that. I used to
Mm,
do that. I used to be that parent, because that was probably this imprinted pattern in me of, if there's a problem, a child comes to me, I'm going to immediately go into fix it mode. And or like it's not a big deal, dismissive mode. And now I could see the impact that it had on my kids and my relationship, how it really just made this gap. And now it's so much easier to just kind of feel what they're feeling and go into it. And I think that that's what makes me good at what I do in my work with kids, because I
mm,
have these very vivid memories of it happening to me as a child and
yeah.
how it felt. And so just being like, I'm not going to do that to another child.
Right.
Yeah.
And just the significance of if there had been someone who you could have brought your little dying bunny to and say, look, my bunny's dying, and to go to them weeping and brokenhearted, and to have them take you in their arms and say, oh my gosh, Vicky, this is really sad. This is your little bunny, and you love her so much, and you've been
Mhm.
so good at taking care of her and feeding her and cleaning her cage. You've done everything you could have
Mhm.
done. And in that moment, if someone would have been there, whether it was the teacher, whether it was your mom, whether it was your dad, whoever, that
Mhm.
moment, you would have been able to handle that moment. You would have somehow been able to get through it.
Yes.
Um, because like you said, you were a smart kid. You did a lot of things that were amazing. You were called on. You had this resilience in you, but you still were a child with a child's heart, and you needed that comfort and you needed that care. And no one was there to offer it to you. I mean, from your story, it doesn't sound like you went to your mom or your dad and told them what had happened
No.
or told them about this, your dying bunny, or the teacher who berated you and shamed you, or your classmates, or even wetting yourself. It didn't seem like there was that channel or that safety where you could go and tell them this story and where they could have
Mhm.
comforted you and given you what you needed. So it didn't seem like anyone was there to provide you what you needed as a child in that moment. And
Yeah.
that's heartbreaking. That's really sad. And you mentioned that word, you feel so much sadness for yourself. Like,
Mhm.
could you not see this little girl who needed to be comforted and was going through all these things? And like you said,
Yeah.
that's where you're able to then draw on that experience, as heartbreaking and sad as it is, and then turn around and offer that to children now. Be that
Yes.
grown up who says, yeah, I see you. I see what you're going through. That's really
Yes.
rough. You shouldn't have to. Let me, sit here with me, and let's go through it together.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful that you've been able to, take that goodness from that experience. And
Yeah.
yeah, thanks. Thanks for sharing that with
Yeah.
us. Mm,
One of the other things that I also want to bring up and that I understand now, I guess, as an adult who works with kids and does these things, is that when kids go through something really big, and I remember, my situation here and not understanding why my bunny died and what was happening. Of course,
yeah.
no knowledge of, apart from my bunny falling on the floor. And I remember the other boy saying he probably has internal bleeding and not really understanding, like, what does that mean as a 9-year-old child, right? And all these things happening, and the concepts being quite big for a child to understand, or like beyond our, what we can make sense of. And so I use this picture in some of my trainings about like a child's brain, and it's got like those like tangled up spaghetti inside of it, and that's what's happening in those situations. It's huge. There's so many things coming at you. You can't make sense of it, right? And an adult's purpose in that, a parent, an adult, a coach, whoever, is to help the child organize what's happening so that they can be like, okay, I understand, and I feel safe, and I feel like I know what to do next, right? And that the helping adult will also come in and maybe suggest some things if they really don't have an idea. But yeah, just realizing that I grew up with that spaghetti in my head, all these different situations I went through with no safe adult there to help me organize my experiences. And so it's funny because um I see myself as an adult who's kind of scattered with lots of different thoughts. And, sometimes I think I've got ADHD. And I'm like, a lot of times it feels like there's so much going on in my head. It's just jumbled up. And really, it's not knowing. It's the fact that there is no one there to really help me organize my experiences. And I didn't have that growing up. And now I
Mm,
do.
yeah.
So,
I noticed
yeah.
that, even, sorry to cut you off, but even in the way that when you talk sometimes, you talk as if you're walking through it. You're
Mhm.
helping yourself make sense of things and processing things now. And you didn't have that experience growing up. So now that you're able to do that and you feel comfortable and confident and like, yeah, that's the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to process. I'm going to be talking. I'm going to go off on tangents, but it's going to be
Mhm.
processing and making sense of things. And I think that's so beautiful that you can do that for yourself now, and you know what you need. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. That's
So, and
that's
that's why having conversations like this with somebody who I'm quite an auditory person. So when I hear myself talk concepts and things that happen out loud, it makes sense for me in my brain. That's why I'll sometimes talk to myself. Um, but talking with somebody else can just be like, oh, when something gets stuck in your head and you ruminate over and over, but just saying it or writing it down on paper, and it's like, bing, makes sense. So,
Yes.
so that's why, talk therapy does work for a lot of people. It also doesn't work for a lot of people,
Mm.
but having safe conversations, and it doesn't have to be a professional, but like we talked about in our last episode, somebody who can hold space and just be
Mm.
like, not try to jump in with their own, this is how I think the spaghetti should go, right? Because it's not your head. It's just being there and holding the space and offering the comfort and the safety to let them organize the spaghetti in their head. I'm gonna call it spaghetti in the head from now.
Like that. Just like that container. It's a safe place where,
Yeah,
yeah, there's this jumble and I'm gonna keep it safe and so you can slowly start, to come pick it. I like that
yeah,
analogy. It looks good. Sounds good. Yeah. Okay. I think maybe the next thing we can do is go on to, and this will, I mean, segue very well into our next part where we kind of like start to take a step back a little bit and help people understand kind of like, well, why was it that we were in these groups and why do we have teachers and why weren't parents getting involved? And because um, it's difficult to understand it if you haven't been in it for sure. But even if you have, I mean, not been in it, but if you've heard about it and you've been like, oh yeah, I knew that, Michelle or Vicky, they went through these things, unless you kind of do a bit of a deep dive and learn
mm,
about more of these things, it's really difficult to wrap your head around, why and
yes,
how. So one thing I did, I'm writing a book right now, and I took a couple of what I call them as snapshots. So snapshots of myself as a 5 to 7 year old, and a snapshot of maybe as a teenager, and then a snapshot of a young adult. And I just thought that the snapshot of myself from 5 to 7 could kind of help people understand a little bit more about how we grew up and the context
mm,
behind that. So I'm just going to open this up and read it. Okay. So, okay, so I've written this out here and I'm going to read it. It's a little bit long, but I'll just try to pick and choose the more pertinent pieces. Okay, so I said I was born and raised in a religious cult, and I finally left this group when I was 28 years old. This was a highly coercive, destructive cult which damaged the lives of thousands of men, women, and children from 1968 until today. The name of this group, when it was first founded in Huntington Beach, California, USA, was the Children of God, and the cult leaders later changed its name to the Family of Love and the Family, and today it's still known as the Family International. The founder's name was David Brantberg, and after his death in 94, his wife Karen Zerby and her partner Steve Kelly became the cult leaders, and the cult is still in operation today. So like before Vix, we were talking that there is a lot that has been written about this group. There have been documentaries on it
oh yeah,
for, many years. There have been quite a few books written by people who have left the group, academics and experts who have written books on the group. So there is a lot out there. But I think
yeah,
what we were saying was that what we would like to share is how it impacted us personally, what it was like for us as children and young people growing up in this group.
yes,
Okay, so I said, welcome to my world as I knew it as a little girl between the ages of 5 until my young adult years. So, snapshot one, I am between the ages of 7 to 10 years old. My name is Michelle, but my nickname before was Mimi. That is what
mm,
my papa called me before he left when I was about 5. I don't know where he went, and I miss him, but I'm not supposed to talk about him. My mom has gotten married again to my second father, who is now my dad, John. I have one sister and 3 brothers, and my mom is often pregnant. We have been living in Japan, Macau, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. Welcome to my world. It is called the family. The family is the most loving, safe, and wonderful place in the world to be. It's the only place I want to be. In the family, we have a leader. His name is Grandpa. I have never met Grandpa, but I know him very well. I love reading the comic book stories we have about him. Sometimes we have a whole chest of, or sometimes a bookshelf about him. It depends on what home we are in. Life with Grandpa books are the only storybooks we have, and I don't mind because they're fun to read. I learn all about his life as a little boy, a teenager, and what he's doing now as an old man with his family. Grandpa is smart, wise, loving, and caring. Sometimes in his stories, he gets a little bit angry with his own family and the people he's living with because they've done something wrong. He always wants us to learn a lesson from what's happened so that we stay safe and don't make God unhappy. Our sins will always find us out, so when we do something wrong, we should always confess and take the punishment. Grandpa says punishments are from God, and they're good. It shows us that God loves us. Grandpa is God's end-time prophet. We know from the Bible that Jesus will return soon at the end times, and that Grandpa is here to tell us important things about what's going to happen so we can be ready. It's really important to listen to Grandpa. He knows everything God wants us to do. We should always listen and obey and not ask questions. Asking questions isn't good. It shows that we don't have enough faith and are in doubt. I don't want to doubt. It's terrible to be a doubting Thomas. I also don't want to make mistakes because mistakes are sins, and sins show that we don't love God. If I don't love God, this is the worst thing I can do because God gave his son Jesus to die for me. Every time I do something bad, I'm showing God and Jesus that I'm ungrateful, proud, selfish, and just thinking about myself instead of the sacrifice he made for me. I do love Jesus. He's kind and I think he loves me, but I'm a bit afraid of God. I'm so afraid of getting in trouble and bad things happening to me or my family. Sometimes I lie because I'm so afraid of getting spanked or missing out on something fun. I also get in trouble for asking questions or saying things I shouldn't. I'm a big mouth and I always say the wrong things. I also have another name. It's Michelle Willing Clay. Some of the big people in our home told my mom I was stubborn, willful, and just basically a naughty girl. So they told her that I was too proud and needed to be more humble. I don't know what they said after that, but later she said she had chosen a new name for me. It was Willing Clay, and she hoped that I would become willing clay so it would be easy for me, for the potter to make me into a better vessel. I really try hard to be willing clay, but it's sometimes hard. I don't see my mom and dad very often because sometimes they live with me and sometimes they don't. Our family lives with many other families in one home. We have a large house with several rooms, and the girls sleep in one room and the boys in another. The mommies and daddies sleep in their own rooms with their babies and toddlers. During the day, we go to our groups, and our teachers take care of us. We always start off with word time, where we will read Grandpa stories and other newsletters and papers Grandpa and Maria send us. Maria is Grandpa's wife. She's a lot younger than he is, and she's quite pretty in all the storybooks. We don't know what they actually look like because that would be dangerous for Grandpa, Maria, and their family. The enemies would find and hurt them. The devil hates Grandpa because he is God's end-time prophet, so we have to protect Grandpa and keep him safe. We do this by listening and obeying and always doing what he tells us because that's what God wants us to do. Maria is Grandpa's secretary. She makes sure that none of God's words fall to the ground. That's kind of a bit of a snapshot. It does get a little bit longer. I'm going to read one last part. I recently ran away from our home and I got in huge trouble for it. They were really angry at me because I persuaded another two girls to come with me. They said I had let the devil in and I was dangerous. They didn't let us eat or drink for hours. One of them came in and beat me with a fly swatter until my legs and bottom bled. I couldn't sit down and it was very painful and embarrassing. Mom and Dad don't even know, or if they do, they haven't come and talked with me about it. I don't even know where they are. Maybe it's better they don't know. They'd be so ashamed of me, or they would punish me again. I'm now going to be put on silence restriction for a couple of months and not allowed to talk to anyone. I have to memorize grandpa quotes and Bible verses so I remember what I did wrong and not do it again. That's the end of snapshot one of when I was between the ages of, let's say, 5 to 7, a little bit older, maybe 9, 10. So as I'm reading this, Vix, what comes up for you?
Just very interesting to see things. Of course, we talk about these things that happened, and I think a lot of us use humor to cope of, oh my gosh, all these weird rules and restrictions and just the habits and the different what's the word I'm looking for? The different processes that we had to do things and go through. It was really strange. It's like, alien. But we tend to laugh about it like as adults now because we say it doesn't really hurt us. And obviously we still carry a lot of the pain. But hearing about it from a child's perspective, like a little child, this is what they believe, this is their world. It's like, who is this child? Like, what? And it makes so much sense as to why you then became a teenager who did the things you did, or an adult who has those, who carries that baggage with them, because this is, your formative years. And, I will say under 5, but, school age years. And just the beliefs, I can hear the beliefs are so heavy of, I must do this, I must listen. And I think what I'm getting is wow, the control, like the fear and the control over um getting you to do everything, not just because grandpa wanted it, but it was God, right? And God, tying into everything of Jesus died for our sins, and if you do anything wrong, you're an ungrateful person, and this is the worst thing you can do. You're basically throwing your salvation back in Jesus's face and saying, "I don't
Mm.
want it." And it's such a heavy burden to carry because it's moral. It's not just about, okay, you made a mistake, which we weren't allowed to make those either, right? Um, but the heaviness of the morality of our souls, and we talked about our souls, like you're gonna lose your salvation. I remember praying for my salvation over and over anytime I was naughty because I thought I lost it and I'm going to be
Yeah.
going to hell.
Yeah.
So I can see how effective that was, but also how heavy it was for children to carry those kind of beliefs. Yeah. Yeah. And then,
Yeah.
of course, all the other little things, I'm just like, oh, yeah.
Yes,
I think
those
that's where the
things
humor
that
comes
the idiosyncrasies and just like, oh yeah, that's how that was and that's how that was. For me, as like the reason why I did that, I mean, I was doing it and writing my book, but it actually became an exercise to step back into yourself as a child. And that's why, like, even as I read it, I was reading it as, a young child would with the intonation and a certain, style of reading because you are innocent and you don't know anything. Your brain is forming, literally
Yeah.
forming. So this is your reality, this is your truth, this is your word. You don't know anything else, and you don't know how to judge, and you don't know anything else but what you're taught. And
Yeah.
like you said, yes, I guess at that point we didn't realize it was so heavy, but yes, day in and day out to think I could be responsible for someone else, something bad happening to someone else. And so I have to be good. And the weight of that, it was really, really hard. And I think I see that more if as I go on and did the snapshot of a teenager and then as a young
Mm,
woman, what all these beliefs and carrying this huge weight with me up until, till I turned 28 pretty much when I left the group. Um,
yeah.
yeah, what that did and how it impacted me. So yeah, it's a helpful exercise. It's I would say difficult at the same time, but then at the same
Yeah.
time it's quite eye-opening. And I mean that's what this group did essentially. It was very, very good at controlling us. It was a highly coercive group. And
Yeah.
I just have something else here that I'm going to open up. So to just kind of give a few characteristics of this group. So it says that the definition of a cult or high coercive group is generally characterized by its authoritarian leadership, manipulative tactics to control members, isolation from mainstream society, and the use of psychological and sometimes physical coercion to maintain obedience and loyalty. And that's, yeah, pretty much the group that we grew up in a nutshell. And some of the
Yeah.
harmful practices was, I put this in because I thought it's something that's not often talked about, but I think in going back and looking at our relationship with our parents, especially how that
Mhm.
impacted us. So
Yeah.
there was collective ownership of the children. TFI
Mhm.
practiced communal living with children considered communal property rather than belonging to the individual parents. So in the story that you bring where you were with your teacher and she was the one who engaged you and basically gave the verdict of your rabbit dying and then you not maybe not seeing your parents for could be that day for a short time in the evening or maybe later on in the week. It's not like
Yeah.
they were even really allowed to get involved or be the ones to engage your heart or to comfort you. That was given to someone else to do, whether they did or they didn't. And that's really, I mean, it's just it's criminal in my opinion because the child needs that. They're growing up, they need that engagement from their parents to comfort them and
Mhm.
to make, like you said, that tangle, to make sense and process what's going on so that it doesn't become a traumatic experience. That just didn't happen.
Yeah.
So this led to the breakdown of traditional family structures and damaged parent-child relationships.
Mhm.
And also there was a lot of isolation from society. So TFI discouraged contact with outsiders, and this fostered an environment of dependency and limiting members' exposure to external perspectives. So we only
Mhm.
had what they wanted us to think. It's not like we could even compare or contrast or say, let's consider that from a, critical perspective. There was none of that as,
Yeah.
either. Yeah.
And I think when people try to or realize there probably was another perspective, it was like anything that wasn't TFI's perspective was the devil's perspective. So
Exactly.
there wasn't even any gray. It was black and white, very black and
Mm,
white thinking.
yeah.
So we grew up thinking that if it
Mm,
wasn't this, it was bad.
right.
So, and again, that's another part of coercive control, right? It's us and them.
Hmm.
Really
Yes.
good at making members, if you're not one of us, then you're, and I think it maybe even like it wasn't a Bible verse, but it was a quote that we were told a lot growing up, kind of like either with us or against us or something like that, right? It was
Yes.
just,
If you're not with me, you're against me, this
yes,
sort of
yes.
thing. And then, taking Bible verses and scripture out of context and twisting it,
Mhm.
perverting it, and reinterpreting it, basically using
Yes.
it as another method to control and manipulate you. So all of this, I mean, was under the umbrella of, I would say, spiritual abuse. They spiritually abused us. And then under that umbrella, that's when all other sorts of abuse can take place. So there was child abuse, obviously. I mean, for us as children, so many of the experiences and the things growing up to us should just never have happened. It was just absolutely
Mhm.
wrong. Physical, spiritual, emotional, sexual, and then all the trauma that occurred because of those abusive practices. It was a lot to, I guess, both of us, it's only been more recently where we're starting to step into this place of healing, where we're starting to realize, wow, they really did a number on us,
Yeah.
and how much work we have to do to really, heal and then clean back those parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
It's a big journey. It's a long journey, and it's
Yes.
kind of layer upon layer upon layer.
For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
another thing, I mean, talking about kind of like, I guess, we've kind of spoken a little bit about how it was for us as children, just like a snapshot of what happened to you when your little bunny died. And then for me as a little girl, we can kind of start to have a sense of what it was like. But then um, people say, well, if all these things were happening, why didn't you just leave? Your parents,
Mhm.
if they weren't able to engage with you and if they didn't even know what was happening with you and you were being abused, at some point they would have known. And at some point, you as children or young teenagers, you would have said something to your parents and you would have gotten out. Come on, duh. But it wasn't like that. And that's what a lot of people struggle with. They don't understand how we could have stayed for as long as we did. First of all, our parents, and then, once they had us children, why we would have stayed. Um, do you have anything kind of like just to touch on that point a little bit more? Why we were so deeply entrenched and then why it was so hard to get out?
Yeah. Well, I always relate it to abusive relationships, and a lot
Mm,
of people who aren't there aren't living there with all the mind games, all the trauma bonding, all the, stuff that goes on in any kind of abusive relationship, right? Not even as a collective, just as a one-to-one person. And so, why do women stay with abusive relationships or in abusive relationships? why do they stay when it's getting so bad when they have kids? When they and this is what a lot of kids can't seem to understand, kids who grow up to be adults, and they're like, "Why did you stay with him, mom? He was beating us every day, and, you know, if you didn't do it for yourself, why didn't you do it for your children?" And so, anybody who is in a, high coercive or high control relationship can probably understand some of the dynamics that go there. There's a lot of guilt, there's fear, there's, I would say, even if there isn't any abuse, I talk with moms who are unhappy in their marriages. Maybe their husband isn't the greatest. And I know this from my own relationships that I stayed in far longer than I should have. But you kind of think that hopefully things will get better.
Mm,
I know for a lot of maybe the parents who were in the cult and their children were being abused, or they were aware of abuse going on. There's always this something that tells you, but not my child. It's not happening to my child. It
mm,
may be
mm,
happening somewhere else, but it's not happening to my child, right? And
mm,
I think we look at the world in general of bad things happening in the world. And you're like, as long as it doesn't affect my little bubble, it's
mm,
just easier not to look at it, right? And so we
mm,
have this almost avoidance technique as parents or as humans to keep us safe, right?
mm,
Because if I actually looked at this, saw it happening, the onus would be on me to do something about it. If I
mm,
don't know, I don't have any responsibility there.
mm.
So yeah,
And then
I know.
if you do feel some powerlessness to leave, then that narrative plays in well, because if you feel like I can't do anything, then you have to then say, okay, well, it can't be that bad. Because if it were that
Mhm.
bad, I would leave. I would do something. So it kind of like feeds into each other,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
That's what happened with me as well. And I remember telling myself this, and I look at it as adult, and why did I stay in that relationship so long?
Mm,
And I remember going, but it's not as like it's still okay. Like trying to find the one piece that ticks the box, it totally ignoring all the other things that are
mm,
completely, not crossing boundaries or not up to your standards. And you just look for that one thing so you can stay because the leaving part is so scary. It
mm.
means
Yes.
onus is on you, the responsibility is on you. There's fear. How am I going to support myself? Even more so when you have children, right?
Mm,
How am I going
yes.
to support my children? If it was just me, maybe I would leave. But now I've got children. I need to stay here. This is a better place for them than I could
Mm,
provide for them. So it is this, we talk about learned helplessness, right? Where you almost give up your control willingly to somebody else, even though if you really thought about it and really wanted to, I think, and have had that confidence that it's gonna be tough, but it's gonna be okay, I can do it,
mm.
that it's, yeah, sometimes just easier to stay than to deal with all the unknowns. The
Yeah.
what they the devil right? So,
Right. That's very
it's tough.
true. And when you're talking about having children as well, that's another way, a tactic that the cult used was telling the parents, telling our parents, this is the best place for your children to be. You staying in this group is keeping them safe from the vice, from the drugs, from the violence, from the blah, blah, blah. And yes, we know all those things are true, but that's like turning a completely blind eye to all the horrible abuses that were happening in the cult, that the cult
Yeah.
was instigating, that the cult was, systematically implementing to keep us, under their thumb. So
Mhm.
parents in their mind, well, maybe to be a good Christian or to be, a believer, to be following God, this is really the best place for my children. Yes, maybe we have to sacrifice our time with them or our ability to actually properly parent them. Maybe we have to give up these things and sacrifice those things, but that's God asking that of us. And this is really the
Mhm.
best. And that's what I even put in my story. This is my family. This is the best place on earth to be. This is the most loving. This is what we were told day in, day out, indoctrinated. And we didn't have anything to contrast that to. So, of course, this
Mhm.
was the best place on earth, the most magical place on earth, par Disney. But, it does when you're taught that and the parents you're indoctrinated to believe this is the best place, this is the best place, this is where we need to stay, you don't there's no part of your brain which is considering, but what if there was something else, you don't even have any of that bandwidth to do that. So that's
Mhm.
another thing. And then having my own kids as well, so we're three generations. There's our parents, mom and dad, and then they gave birth to our generation, and then there's our children's generation. So I married within the group, and then I had two boys within the group, and I was terrified once I had my two boys of leaving the group. I had this fear, and it feeds back into what you were saying in your story, and like what your teacher said to you. Your God allowed your rabbit to die because of something you must have done. This is the fear that I lived with. If I leave the group, my kids are going to have to pay. I was terrified of losing my boys because at some point it may just be too much for me and I had to leave. So that's another reason why I continue to stay in.
Yeah.
That's that was really tough. And then leaving, slowly, organically leaving. I think we left between when I was the ages between 27 and 28. And there wasn't any brimstone and fire. No one died. We were able to pay the rent the first month, the second month, and you start to think, actually, I'm doing all right. I've got this. Maybe, there's just some little way that God will not just strike me down dead. And then as time goes on, things are just okay. You don't know how they're okay because you've always been told it will never be okay. But as time goes on, you start to buy another piece of furniture for your house and it's okay. And you're able to go out to that meal and you're able to watch a movie and you're able to start having friends, which are not in the cult. And you're like, you don't even know what's going on. It starts to, yeah, I remember that was really a scary, but then also eye-opening time for me those first few years after leaving. And how was it for
Yeah.
you, Vix? Because I know we had a bit different circumstances. I left when I was 27, 28, and you left when you were quite a bit
Seven,
younger.
yeah,
Yeah,
17. So I guess, I didn't have kids. So I kind of, it's funny because I always talk about how when we were younger, you seemed to be the rebellious one, the big mouth, right? You got all the spankings and all the punishment, and I was considered the good girl, right? Because I learned very quickly I had to be, otherwise that was gonna happen to me.
right,
So um yeah, learned quickly. But then at some point, like I tell all parents, the good kids, they're not being good because that's, well, what looks good to society is don't speak up, don't speak your mind, follow along with the rules, be as compliant as possible. And that's not in a child's nature to be compliant. We have our own, we have we're our own spirits,
right.
we're our own people. And so I rebelled big time.
Mm,
And I'd say probably when I was 13, 14, I started
mm,
to rebel, right?
mm.
Just having that, I'm so tired of being the good girl all the time. I want to do what I want to do. But of course, not wanting, there's still family dynamics there and not wanting to disappoint mom and dad. And also, we lived in China at the time. So, another part of our story is that we were really told, like security wise, that we were going to get thrown in prison. So, apart from God punishing us, there was that, but there was also legal fear, right? If I mean, we called the police the Romans for so long. It was so funny. I actually thought, watch all these Bible movies. I literally thought that Romans with their big headdresses and spears were going to come take us away. And it's just, again, just to give you a snapshot of what went on in our brains and how we understood things as kids. Um, yeah, we were constantly being told that if you say the wrong thing or if you talk to the wrong people, you're going to be taken away from us, right? You have, like, putting the responsibility of safety for the home and all the other children we lived with on a child, on the individual child. Of,
You're
if
right.
you say the wrong thing, the police are going to come and take all, your parents are going to be put in jail and all these things. And so just another level of control and fear for us as children.
Right.
So I forgot what the original, oh, how, what was it like when I left?
Yeah.
Oh, long, kind of gradual, and I kind of gradually moved away. But I think when I really cut ties completely was when I was um 19, 20. And I also, like you, I also married someone from the group, very young age. And that did not go well. We both had our trauma and we just bounced off each other and it didn't go well. And so I kind of made the decision to leave everything. So left my marriage, left the city that I was living in, which, our family was living in at the time, which means also leaving the cult and everything behind. So it was a very, even though the moving out and gradually breaking the rules and moving out of my parents' house and doing things that we weren't allowed to do, like drinking and smoking and doing all those things as a, teenager, Um, and then finally going, I'm done with it and moving away. And that fear of all these things that we were told of, God's gonna punish you.
Yeah.
You're gonna get into a terrible accident. You're a backslider. And I know a lot of people who have religious trauma were told this, right?
Mhm.
God has his highest will and you are failing God and he's gonna punish you for it. And
Yeah.
so funnily enough, when you talked about that always waiting for the other shoe to drop, like, when is it gonna happen?
Yeah.
But then, like you said, you buy another piece of furniture, you go out to a meal with your friends, and, "Oh, I didn't get hit crossing the street because, because God's angry with me,"
Yeah.
or almost like, uh, rewriting all these things that we were told and being like, "Wait, but it didn't happen. All these things that we were told, it didn't happen. I'm gonna do one
Mhm.
more thing. Oh, that didn't happen either." And almost if all we were told wasn't true, what else wasn't true? Or what
Mm.
else is actually true that
Is
I
true. For me, it
don't
was
know?
what is true. That comes later, but yeah, go ahead.
Ooh, I think we paused.
Yeah.
Oh, are
Okay.
we
You
back?
can come back. What is true?
What is true? Yeah. So yeah, what isn't true from what we were being told all our lives, and what is actually true. And
Yeah.
it's rewriting. It's like stepping out into the world for the first time. I talk about like Tarzan and Jane. Like Tarzan going to the city for the first time. It's like what? It's like a
Mm.
new life, a new world, a new reality altogether. And you're
Mm.
like, it's amazing. There's so much out there to learn, but wow, I'm a young adult now and I've got to learn everything from scratch. I didn't know how banks worked. I didn't know, all these really basic things. And I'm just like,
Mm.
I came to the US later and I'm like, what's a mortgage? Right? So really
Yeah.
basic stuff, like feeling like a child again. Like
Mm.
I've got to relearn everything. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was really tough.
Yeah. And there's no one to tell you what to do. I mean, Meghan Markle, she says, "Oh, no one taught me how to curtsy, or no one taught me." I'm like, no one taught us how to, just be human in the world that we live in. We were just in like this bubble where you have God's protection and his care, and everything exists within this bubble. And as soon as you step out, we didn't know how to, how to live even.
Out
And
of yeah.
feeling that, yeah, that there was a lot of pressure and stress. And I think, yeah, going from that part in our life to just, into day in and day out. We need to pay bills. We need to take care of our kids. Um, for me, I personally kind of like put my life on hold as far as everything that we knew before because I couldn't grapple with it. I couldn't understand, like you said, if all of that isn't true, what else isn't true? And more importantly for me is what is true? So that what is truth or what is that for me was huge. And it really was this burning question in my mind and my soul for a long time. But because I just couldn't even think of what the answer would be and I didn't see any way forward, I just basically put it all in a box and just put it under the bed and didn't think about it. And that was probably for about 10 years where I didn't know what was going on. And I didn't know how to answer any of my questions or who could answer them. And then also, you don't know who to trust. First of all, you don't trust yourself because you allowed yourself to be in that state for so long, even if it really wasn't your choice, you blame yourself. So you
Yeah.
don't think you can trust yourself. You don't know who else to trust. It really just messes with you. And that was really
Good.
tough time in my life. But you learn how to cope, you learn how to get on with life, and you learn how to fake really, really well. I learned how to fake, and even to convince yourself of the story that actually I'm doing all right. I'm pretty resilient. I'm, pretty amazing, given all of that stuff I had to deal with. I told
Yeah.
myself the story, but then, like you said, at some certain point, the penny drops and everything is not a-okay. And
Oh
then you've
yeah.
got to start dealing with it at that point in your life, which I
Yeah.
think that's maybe the point that we're at. We're dealing with stuff, we're grappling with things, we're wrestling. It's not easy, but it's better than just keeping it in a box and keeping it hidden
Mhm.
under the bed because at some point you're going to have to deal with it. You're going to have to take it out. And I think it's better to do it sooner rather than later. And then, you realize that there are people you can talk to, there are
Yeah.
resources. And I think these conversations are happening a lot more now than they were before.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'd actually like to say, like that box that you put under the bed, you think, oh, everything's safe there, right? I can unpack it whenever I want to. And
Yeah.
no, that box is very sneaky. And things that are in the box that you don't think, if I just compartmentalize it and don't look at
Mhm.
it, that avoidance technique as well, right? It's not
Right.
going to bother me. But we talk about the past informs our present. And
Mm.
the way I interact with my kids is a reflection of what's in that box. The way I, when something goes on in my marriage, my brain goes straight to, oh, it's going to be like this. And this is what,
Yes.
this was me for years. It's going to be like this. That's all the stuff in the box. Like
Right.
you can't exist separately from that box because all of that stuff is a part of you.
Yeah.
So,
It's like wearing dirty underwear every day. So
yeah, right. And it affects you and affects people around you, whether or not you
you don't think they
realize it.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
And that's kind of, I guess, the one part I wanted to talk about was like leaving the group. How has it been for us? We talked a little bit about that, but where kind of like, where do we find ourselves? Or maybe kind of taking one step back, what was the catalyst for us that made us realize, I think the box is under the bed, but it's not. I'm actually living in it day in and day out. It's actually
Mm,
my life. It's the house I live in. When did we
yes.
come to that sort of realization? And what was the catalyst that made us be like, okay, I got to deal with this. This has gone on long enough. What was it like for you?
So I thought it was when I became a mom, right? Because I was
Mm,
like, I'm gonna be a good parent. I'm gonna parent differently to the way I was brought up, thinking that it was that easy.
mm,
And I talk about this, with the parents I work with, that it doesn't matter if you make a mental decision to be different than your parents. We have default, right? We go into default mode. Unless we are taught differently, we go into default mode. So I thought I was doing a great job as a parent. My kids got good grades. I was a teacher at their school. All the kids loved me. I lived in a house. I, could provide for my kids and everything. And this was probably a few years after my kids were born, like my second was born. And I had been parenting up into this way when my kids were younger, so easier to control. They are still very much in that stage where they think you are the moon and sun, or moon and sun, whatever, moon and stars. And, things, we went through regular parenting struggles, but nothing really big until my oldest started getting a bit older. And then he started, like 9 years old, started to question, starting to, but why, mom? And his brother was there, so they were having sibling rivalry. He was getting bullied at school. Um, and the way I was handling it was from this place of completely like, I don't know what I'm doing here, right? And I was a teacher, so I thought I had all these skills, and it worked very, very well with kids who weren't my own kids. But our kids are that compass that show us what needs healing in ourselves.
mm,
So him getting to that age where, remember I said that my beliefs and stuff about myself started when I was 8, 9 years old. That's when my oldest son started, bringing out these patterns in me, or reminding me that I had these patterns in me. And that's where I was like, whoa, I don't know what I'm doing here. And I thought I knew I did. So I just went right into default mode and parented the way that I thought I should.
mm,
And then I realized that it was really damaging my relationship with him.
mm,
And so I was feeling the effects for those years, but not until I moved to the US when I became a stepmom. And I said at that point, I had lost custody of my oldest boy. I had uprooted my life and moved to the US and became a stepmom and all of these things. And I was like reinventing myself all over again. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing.
mm.
Like, there's not one part of my life that I feel stable in because everything is up in the air. And what am I doing? And that was where went straight into it's fine. If I just fix the situation, if I just learn some skills, we're really great at learning things, right? The faking, right? Learning skills, patching things over, it's going to be fine. Not until I realized, like, wow, these skills that I'm trying to learn to help my kids, I never learned them myself. I
Mhm.
don't know what how can I teach somebody something I don't know myself?
Yeah.
And that's where I really realized, like, whoa, I have to go back and backtrack to my childhood basically and teach myself these skills: communication, emotional regulation, self rewriting my self talk, all of this. And I think that was the catalyst for me to really be like, I can't be the parent my kids need me to be until I become that person myself, be that
Mhm.
parent for myself. And
Yeah.
that's where the catalyst started.
Wow. Yeah, I love that quote that you mentioned, that our kids are the compass that point us to where we need healing ourselves. That is so
Yeah.
true. I heard something similar. Children will be our greatest trigger
Yeah.
because they'll be like, we're like, oh my goodness, that's how, the narrative of how I was brought up, or the beliefs, the really, really deeply, hidden, ingrained, unconscious beliefs of how we were raised. And we think we know better, but our
Yeah.
body doesn't know any better. So it immediately goes into that, switches into that default. This is how I was raised. So this is how you need to be raised. And you're like, whoa, what am I doing? Yeah, I find that with Jane sometimes too now. Yeah, for me, it really had to do with interpersonal
Mhm.
relationships. I entered into a relationship with someone, it was a long distance relationship, and we saw each other. We were together for about coming close to 3 years, and then I discovered that he had betrayed me. And at that time, we had our little girl, so Jane, together. She was about 6 months old, and everything that I had carefully constructed, carefully built up into this point, it just in a day or even a matter of hours, just came crashing down. And when you think that you're doing like a really good job at, keeping this facade up, and even if you somehow know it's a facade, but you're like, yeah, but it works. And
Yeah.
it's somehow beautiful. And people are kind of thinking, yeah, it's pretty good too. They're buying into this story that I'm selling, when it just, comes crashing down and you're left with nothing. And everything that you thought that you had just is gone. Yeah, I reached a point of like just so much emotional pain, but then also physical pain. Like I literally couldn't get out of bed in the morning. I had
Mhm.
like frozen back, and it was from nothing. I'm like, I didn't injure myself. I couldn't get out of bed. I was breastfeeding Jane at that time. She was just a baby. I didn't have any milk for her. Like my body was falling apart. My mind was, I reached a point where I was just in so much pain. I was like, I can't keep doing the same thing in the
Yeah.
future if I want things to look different from the past. I can't keep
Yes.
just doing the same thing, repeating the same thing over and over again. And it just got me to this point where whatever I'm doing is more painful than acknowledging that something's gone wrong, seriously wrong. And I really need to take a good hard look at this. And then I reached this point where I started to be open to I can do this. There are resources. Before that point, I always told myself, like, I can't go see a psychologist. I can't see a counselor. I was just like grabbing books here and there. And like you said, trying to learn the skills, learn this,
Yeah.
follow a list of, step-by-step process. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. But it was all like superficial. It was all just correcting the symptoms and not
Mhm.
really the underlying root, which I've suffered deep, deep trauma. I'm like really broken on a really deep level, and I can't just keep trying to fix the fissures at the top. I need to like go down into the depths. And that's
Yeah.
what it is for me. It's like just going down into the depths, but you can only fix the fissures at the top for so long until you be like, okay, I gotta go. I gotta go deep. I gotta dig deep. That's what it started for me. It was yeah, personal relationship where I saw the patterns, repeating themselves again and again and again. And you look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, nah, I don't want to keep doing the same thing. And
Mhm.
you start to like basically take the mask off yourself and let yourself see
Mhm.
yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was the big catalyst for me. And I think the point I'm at now in my life is I've, in the last 2 or 3 years been going through this process and doing a lot of healing work. And
Mhm.
for me, what the real I would say like earth-shaking moment was when I picked up this book by Dr. Dan Allender. It's called Healing the Wounded Heart. And in the book, the first time I picked it up, I was like, no, this isn't for me. This doesn't read my story. And I put it back on the shelf. And 6 months later, I took it off the shelf. And it's interesting how you could just be at a slightly different place in your life, and
Mhm.
what you get will be completely different. So I was like,
Mhm.
whoa, this is me. The words just like jumped off the page. And it was like, reading yourself in a book, it just
Mhm.
is life changing. And, mean, this person doesn't know me from Adam. He's written this book, but it speaks to my personal experience. And then I realized, I mean, you could say the overarching theme is that we have a story. We each have a story, and our story matters. And having someone say that, Michelle, you have a story and it matters, and let me hear it. That for me is just huge because most of us, like, it's so easy to minimize and dismiss ourselves and our story and just say, well, that's just the way it was. Or we tell
Mhm.
ourselves, oh, my story isn't as important as somebody else's. Other people have gone
Yes.
through things much worse. Or you
Yes.
know, you have a list of things
Yep.
of objections that you go through, or myths and legends, I like to call them, that you go through. You tell yourself about your story. But when someone says, hey, wait a second, they take your face in your hands and they go, no, you have a story. Your story matters. It's important. Tell it to me. I'm not letting you go until you tell me your story. To have someone see you like that and want to see you, and kind of, I guess, in those moments, be that mom or dad for us with our
Mm.
little dead rabbit in our hands that we're crying over, and says, sit with me, tell me how you're hurting, tell me how much you love your bunny, and let's go through the story together. That is
Mhm.
life changing, you know? And now that I've had someone's do this for me, I feel like I have this gift. I want to just share that with others. So if I can do that with one or two people and just share my experience with others, I mean, I just think if everyone would do this for the person sitting next to them, that would make the world a beautiful place. Yeah.
Yeah. As you're saying that, there's this. I just remember seeing this post. I don't know if it's true or not, but there's this place like a cafe in Denmark or something like that, and instead of books, they have people that you can borrow.
Yeah.
And you go grab a person and sit down with them and have them tell you their story. And I'm
Oh,
like, "Oh, I love
yeah.
that. That's beautiful."
Yeah.
Yeah, because, we go and we read all this crap online, and other people's, not their true stories, but their narratives
The
of how they
narrative.
want the world to be. It's not
Mm,
them. It's who they're trying to portray themselves to be. It's a facade, like that fake, right? We talk
mm,
about, and we miss the story behind the person. Just, I mean, of course, it takes trust, takes vulnerability. You need to have good rapport with that person. But I always, say that some old people do this really well, right?
mm,
They sit there and they'll just that's why I say about coaching that 20 years ago, we didn't have coaches. If you did, you were, or a psychologist or someone, you were rich and you could afford to pay somebody to do that. For your average person, who did they go to? They went to their grandma, they went to their grandpa, they went to the coach who listened to them. They went to the janitor at school who just took that 5 minutes a day to just say, hey, how
yeah.
you doing? Right?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't need to be, because these skills, these empathic listening skills, it takes patience, because what I often find is that the reason why people can't offer these skills to other people is because they need someone to offer it to them. They're
Yeah.
so desperate to be heard themselves that they're like, if I'm here with one on one, I want you to hear my story. How can I hold space for you to tell your story?
Mhm.
I want you to hear mine. We're all so desperate for somebody to just give us time and space,
Yeah.
and not no judgment. I'm just here to listen.
Mm,
So yeah, just being able to offer these skills, to develop these skills within us and offer them to other people as well. And that would just, I think that would just heal so many people immensely, or start the process of healing anyway, right? Just the
yeah.
being there and offering that time and space to other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And having
And
people do that for us as well.
for us, yeah. And I like how you tie your own experience as a mother and a parent and engaging with your sons into what you're doing now, is that your struggle, your pain points, now that you've worked with them and you've learned stuff, you're now channeling that to be a teen and parenting coach to families who are really struggling in those areas. And in the same way, for me, having someone hear my story and take it and help me make sense of it, process it, and then integrate it, and having that healing has given me so much that now, it's just, it feels like that's my calling. I want to go and share that with others and, teach others or just share what I've learned, because it's such a beautiful thing. And I think that when you find what your pain point is and you have that acknowledged and engaged and healed, you take that bit and then you turn it around and you figure out what your calling is, what your purpose, belonging, what your why is, as Simon Sinek says, right? Figure out what your why is, and then turn around, and then you'll have something to give to others. And I think that's kind of the ultimate with this whole process. It's not just about, introspective navel gazing, that you're just trying to like dig deeper, 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 because it could never end. It's
Yeah.
when you do that for yourself, then you're really like, aha, I've got it. What can I do now to pass that on? And that's
Yes.
really, the beauty of it, is passing it on, finding your calling where you can serve others. And
Yeah.
yeah, that for me, that is the ultimate point, and why we, go through these processes anyway.
Why we're
Yeah.
doing this. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I said, especially for, it's the reason I want to have a heart to work with kids, because I'm like, oh, so much of this stuff we wait until we're adults and have our patterns ingrained and our beliefs ingrained and all this pain and all these experiences that we have to heal from. I'm like,
Mm,
why not start with kids? Why not be preventative in mental health, preventative in giving people these skills and tools? Why not move get rid of the knife, or move the knife, rather than giving them a band-aid and going, oh, you cut yourself, here's a band-aid, right? Why
mm,
wait? I've always been like, prevention's better than cure.
mm.
And unfortunately, the world is kind of set up where the money's made with sick people. Sick,
And when
well
there's a
people have
big
been
problem.
healing, right?
Mm,
So yeah. But that is why it's such a passion of mine as well, that if we can teach
mm,
kids, we are impacting the next generation. We don't have to
mm,
wait for a generation of injured people to then need a whole host of helping professionals to just heal them. It's,
mm,
hey, this generation becomes the next generation that will heal others. So
mm.
that's my
Yeah,
passion.
I love that. Beautiful calling. All right, I think we're at the end of our session for today. So yeah, thanks so much, guys, for listening to our stories. Thanks for sitting with us. And we would, because this is a new space again, so we would love to hear your comments, feedback, any insights, and also what's coming up for you as you go on this journey with us. So yes, so grateful for you all, and we look forward to seeing you all next time.